The Synchromystic presents Synchromystique. According to some reports, February 14, yearly commemorated as Valentine's Day, is one of the most commercially lucrative secular holidays on the calendar. The mercenary aspects of the custom seem widely known. Apparently, however, this awareness doesn't sway Joe Schmo from forking over his hard-earned, or even going into hock, to acquire the chocolate, floral, or jewel-bedecked tributes that keep the proverbial doghouse at bay. The profiteers who emphasize and exploit the systemic insecurities upon which these purchases are predicated frequently employ age-old symbols and words of power. Here we find widespread ignorance about the possible interpretations and significance of these emblems, beyond the most ambiguous and superficial talk about love. In this video, we'll take a peek behind the curtain and see if we don't uncover a thinly veiled peep show. It is first of all worth enumerating a few of the striking occurrences of the name Valentine. It definitely has a literary charm, having been used numerous times. For instance, twice for side characters by William Shakespeare in The Two Gentlemen of Verona and Twelfth Night, which latter work was a fixture of the previously released January 6 video. Once by Alexandre Duma, père, in The Count of Monte Cristo, by the Catholic novelist and thinker G.K. Chesterton in his Father Brown detective fiction, and for the name of principles, such as Jimmy Valentine in O. Henry's short story, A Retrieved Reformation, as well as Valentine Michael Smith in Robert Heinlein's A Stranger in a Strange Land. The name is also associated with various crypto-political investigations, for instance of the tightly argued expose of Vietnam's Operation Phoenix, penned by researcher Douglas Valentine. It crops up in the broad field of anomalism when, to give a single illustration, we see that language savant and paranormal investigator Charles Berlitz sometimes collaborated with a zoologist named J. Manson Valentine. Some of the Valentine nodes are decidedly bloodier and more violent. On a small, albeit horrifying scale, one thinks, for example, of the Al Capone-instigated Chicago gangland murders referred to as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. On the level of the apocalyptic, one need only consult the annals of World War II when, over Valentine's Day 1945, which also happened to be Ash Wednesday, Dresden, Germany was bombed into oblivion. Perhaps some of this evident magnetism derives from some almost mystical antecedents. You'll note that a major version of ancient Gnosticism, which system we surveyed both in 10 arcane words and in 10 sex magic cults, owed its name to the 2nd century theologian Valentinus. A major tenet of his subtle religious system was the notion that all reality had its beginning in a single absolute entity, usually termed the One. Everything else owes its existence to this One via a complex process. Further details are available in the 2 previously mentioned videos. For current purposes, we'll draw attention to Valentinus's view that this emanation, to use his term, unfolded through pairs of sexually complementary beings referred to as aeons or archons, depending on their moral properties. The Gnostic system, while by no means plainly explicated, was at least mentioned in the Matrix films. In the movies, advanced artificially intelligent machines keep humans enslaved in a computer-generated dream world. Another Valentine figures prominently in the allied discipline of alchemy. Consider the shadowy figure known only as Basil Valentine, whom we featured in Top 10 Gold-Making Alchemists. Usually situated around the 15th century, he, like Nicholas Flamel, Paracelsus, Solomon Trismosin, and others, was said to have mastered the mysterious art and proto-science of alchemy. Meditating on the fabled Emerald Tablet of Hermes, Basil Valentine allegedly discovered procedures enabling him to attain unnaturally long, or even eternal, life. Although none of Valentine's original manuscripts survive, generations of disciples still pore over abstruse works such as the 12 Keys of Philosophy in the hope of duplicating their master's supposed successes, including unlocking the secrets of limitless wealth. Considering this profit angle, it is striking that the landscapes of big tech and high finance are dotted with a handful of prominent Valentines. For his part, Basil Valentine inspired a host of later esoterics, such as the 16th to 17th century Rosicrucian adept Michael Meyer and the 19th century Kabbalist and magician Eliphas Levi. Some of these strands were picked up and woven into a curious tapestry by the unknown writer whose pen name was Fulcanelli. It was Fulcanelli who, in his Mystery of the Cathedrals, proposed that the historic churches of Europe were repositories for alchemical formulae and lore. According to Fulcanelli, a tradition of secrecy was veiled in riddles, symbols, and images that only the initiated would understand. Alchemy's covert techniques went by a variety of names. One of these was the gay science. For related concepts, see Top 10 Gold-Making Alchemists, as well as Top 10 Sex Magic Cults. One precursor tying this odd lexical possibility to the modern phantasmagoria of sex change operations and transsexualism is the curious case of the long-lived Greek mythical figure Tiresias. The story goes that one day Tiresias was taking a stroll when he happened upon two copulating snakes. Accounts vary as to his motivations. However, the core of the legend has it that Tiresias's walking stick ended up between the serpents. Forthwith, Tiresias was transformed into a woman. Trying to provide even a sketch of the implications of this would take us too far afield. Suffice it to say that the preposterous scene evokes alleged magical wands such as the Rod of Asclepius, which is an emblem of the medical establishment, and the Caduceus, also known as the Staff of Hermes Mercury. For the link between these symbols and the dollar sign, which designates U.S. currency, see the section on adventurer and alleged wonder worker Cagliostro in our video, 10 Gold-Making Alchemists. Fast forwarding momentarily, we arrive at Friedrich Nietzsche, the late 19th century German philosopher who, among other things, proclaimed the death of God. In 1882, he published the first edition of a book titled Die Fröhliche Wissenschaft, that is, The Gay Science. The Gay Science contemplates a wide swath of humanities, including art, history, philosophy, poetry, and religion. Despite his literary flair, Nietzsche's unsystematic, aphoristic style presents interpretive challenges. Still, throughout his corpus, Nietzsche formulates the idea that the exemplary human being must craft his or her own identity through self-realization, without any transcendent reference point. Reflecting on his own verses added as an appendix in 1887, Nietzsche later wrote that they reminded him of the troubadour notion of a gay science, which is epitomized in an almost alchemical amalgam of singer, knight, and free spirit. Elsewhere, Nietzsche develops general themes around the possibility that a rare few are able to love the turbulence and vagaries of life and thereby transcend humanity and go beyond good and evil. Or, as he puts it in his autobiography, the gay science gives birth to a new spirit which dances freely upon the corpse of morality. Paradoxically, Nietzsche apparently believed in an austere determinism, even fatalism, and so his concept of love, amor fati, is bound up with fate. This data might seem an irrelevance presently except for two things. Firstly, the mischievous Roman god Cupid, or Eros in Greek myth, has a reputation for fating lovers by forcing amorous feelings upon his victims with the prick of an arrow. And while Eros is sometimes represented as the offspring of the goddess of love and the goddess of war, Cupid, at least, is often said to have issued partly from Mercury, whose wand, you'll recall, had such a peculiar effect on Tiresias. The original Saint Valentine seems curiously to have been two people who both lived during the 3rd century AD. One of them was a Catholic priest. The other had attained the status of bishop. Incredibly, both were supposedly martyred on the same day. No one is sure why Valentine is associated with lovers, but there are two prevailing theories. The first possibility is that the beheadings of the Saints Valentine may have been associated, or timed to coincide, with one of Rome's numerous annual festivals. In this case, the celebration, called Lupercalia, was focused upon a dual theme, one part of which was to ensure the safety of Rome by ritually purifying it. Lupercalia roughly translates to a phrase meaning to ward off the wolves. Of course, lecherous male suitors have sometimes been compared with wolves. The other related component of the leitmotif was fertility. On this wavelength, it is interesting to note that the name Valentine derives from a Latin root word, valens, which means healthy or vigorous. Myriad lexi-links, or, borrowing Lauren Coleman's vocabulary, name games, can be cataloged. A culturally significant and poignant one was the death on February the 3rd, 1959, of several popular musicians in an airplane crash. You'll recall that the victims included Buddy Holly and the man performing as Ritchie Valens. We can't neglect Rudolph Valentino, stage name of the Italian-born silent-era film star known as the Latin Lover. His unexpected and premature death at the age of 31 is said to have caused mass hysteria and prompted all manner of theatrics from distraught admirers and former, or prospective, lovers. Though Valentino was perhaps aged, as judged by Hollywood's dysfunctional standards, Ritchie Valens was only 17. His tragic story recalls that of the mythical youth Ganymede, who was abducted by Zeus to serve as his cupbearer, as well as his passive homosexual partner on Mount Olympus. In one tale, Ganymede's lamentable condition appears to have resulted from his loss to the god Eros, or Cupid, in a game of dice. It's part of the canonical story of this tragedy that Tommy Alsop and Waylon Jennings had both intended to be on that fateful flight, but were spared. In Alsop's case, good fortune supposedly came by way of a coin toss that he lost, and Valens won. While we're on the subject of luck, we'll note the following. As part of the Lupercalian revels, or so the story goes, the names of eligible maidens would be drawn by the city's eligible bachelors, resulting in random pairings for the remainder of the festival. Given the authenticity of the links, the idea is that this semi-erotic lottery relevantly parallels and is the basis for the contemporary exchange of Valentine's cards. If it seems incredible that ancient Roman religious observations should have anything to do with 21st century America, then take a look at the recently published presentation titled January 6th. That video explains how the so-called Capitol riots were reminiscent of pagan carnivals such as Saturnalia. One particular personality seems to recur in our investigations. I'm thinking of the primordial god who, in Roman mythology, was known as Faunus or Sylvanus. In the present context, we discover that Lupercalia's namesake was sometimes connected to the same character, this time under his Greek name, Pan. If you think that first explanation is for the birds, consider a second possible origin of present-day Valentine traditions. An alternative view has it that our customs partially stem from the medieval belief that birds choose their mates on this day. Which day? Why, the start of the second fortnight of the second month, that is, February 14. For this, we have no less an authority than the towering 14th century English writer Geoffrey Chaucer. Famous for his Canterbury Tales, which are still required reading in many literature courses, Chaucer is credited as advancing the language and forming a bridge between English's Old and Middle periods. According to one manuscript of his lesser-known Parliament of Fowls, this father of English poetry tells us that it was on St. Valentine's Day when every fowl comes to choose his mate. You'll hopefully recall our earlier comments about the linguistic conventions that helped maintain alchemy's secrecy. In view of Chaucer's fascination with our feathered friends, it's remarkable that another name for the previously discussed gay science was the language of the birds. What about the holiday's emblems? It's hard to deny that in its simplest, albeit clumsiest form, the Valentine's heart is little more than a stylized version of an inverted or upside-down triangle. As popular writer Dan Brown publicized in his sensational 2003 novel, The Da Vinci Code, this represents the female reproductive organs, principally the womb. The Latin word for uterus happens to be matrix. Of course, that word has no cultural significance whatsoever. In the lingo of the tarot deck, the womb is covertly referred to as the chalice, or the cup. The analogous suite in a conventional pack of playing cards is, predictably, the heart. Not to harp on the obvious, but the familiar heart icons look nothing whatever like the primary organ of the circulatory system. But these doodles arguably bear more than a passing resemblance to, well, let's just say another detail of human anatomy that principally differentiates the genitalia of biological females from that of males. I'll spare viewers gratuitously graphic attestation of this fact here. Fortunately, or unfortunately, ample evidence is available to anyone over the age of 18 who has access to a working web connection. Spend a little time nosing around the net and you'll discover allusions to an ancient, and alleged combination, abortifacient, aphrodisiac, and contraceptive called silphium. The precise classification and identification eludes modern-day botanists, but depictions of the unknown plant certainly seem familiar. However, when one recalls the equally antique doctrine of signatures, whereby herbs resembling various parts of the body can be used by herbalists to treat ailments of those body parts, one realizes that this is further evidence of our point. Not only this, but the addition of the piercing, or should I say penetrating, arrow more or less clinches it. In plain English, the Valentine heart is an abstract representation of the vagina. It seems to be a truism about human nature that we often fail to understand, or even notice, what is staring us right in the face. It frequently takes a blind seer, in the mold of the legendary Phineas from the story of Jason and the Argonauts, to remedy our ignorance. This theme cuts across some of the examples referenced above. According to some tales, the gender-bending Tiresias was such a character. Or again, consider Neo from the Matrix franchise. He is empowered to see the hidden qualities of the real world only after his eyes are destroyed by the character Bane, the latter being possessed, as it were, by the overarching antagonist, Agent Smith. So take a closer look around you this Valentine's Day, lest one of Cupid's phallic missiles cause you to be blinded by all the love.